Welcome. I see quite a few familiar faces in the room today. When I first met Shelley and Insiyah, these ideas of different sort of organizational structures around ownership were a little bit new to me. I was familiar with the employee-owned organizations, but there are other designs that we're going to be talking about today, which are really interesting ways to organize your company and workspaces that have much talked about outcomes. And so I really wanted to just pass it over today to perhaps Shelley.
Thank you, Glenn. And hello, everyone. And thank you for inviting us to join you here in your weekly meeting. ICA is very happy to share with you the work that we do in employee ownership. So first, let me tell you a little bit about the ICA Group. We're a national not-for-profit business consultancy that was founded in 1977. That is some work that we started doing with labor unions. Our mission is to expand economic opportunity and self-determination by supporting initiatives that empower workers, build community assets, and root capital locally through employee ownership. We believe that all people should enjoy economic self-determination as a means to foster an environment where workers' livelihoods and the communities where they live are stable and secure. We've entitled this presentation, Employee Ownership, Creating Businesses with a Higher Purpose. Conscious capitalism holds that conscious businesses are galvanized by higher purposes that serve, align, and integrate the interests of all their major stakeholders. At ICA, we believe that employee ownership creates businesses with a higher purpose. Sorry about that. I thought that you guys were seeing my screen. I was about to tell you the supports that ICA offers to businesses. And basically two groups. One is technical assistance that we give to existing employee-owned businesses in whatever form they are. Second, we help established or conventional businesses that want to convert to employee ownership. This typically means businesses where the owner wants to sell all or part of the business to a broad base of its employees. Also, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we started a special initiative that we call Keep Their Doors Open. It's our rapid response program to help business owners combine employee ownership with other strategies to avoid closing down their businesses. Our conversion process is in 5 phases. These are our 5 phases. We sit with owners to understand what their goals are. If we feel their goals are compatible possibly with employee ownership, we will assess feasibility. What this means is that we look at the operational feasibility. Are there people in place who can take over the role of the business owner if that business owner is leaving or when that business owner leaves? And we look at the financial feasibility. These are leveraged buyouts. Normally, the employees or person may be putting up 10% in equity, and then the rest is done as a leverage buyout through CDFIs, community development financial institutions. And so we need to answer the question, yes, it is financially feasible, and it's also feasible for the management replacement. And once we answer yes, and the owner says they want to move forward, we move on to plan the transition, helping with the development of the governance rules. We help get the financing, the legal decisions. We don't give legal advice. At this point, a lawyer is brought in, but we do help once that advice is given with making decisions based on that advice. We help to complete the transaction. We have templates and things that make the lawyer's job easier, more efficient, and then cheaper because they have to spend less hours learning about things. And once everything's set up, we train the new owners in ownership culture and democratic decision making. Recently, well, not so recently now, I guess in June, there was an article, an opinion piece written by the former Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich, in the New York Times. And he spoke of a time in 1916 when there was a lot of conflict and even violence between workers and business owners. And they put out a report, the US Department of Labor Statistics put out a report encouraging owners to consider profit sharing with their employees as a way of making peace and having an organization that was more cooperative and would be better for all involved. Sears and Roebuck and Company decided that it would try this experiment, and they started their own profit sharing plan that same year. It was very successful, and by 1968, a typical Sears and Roebuck salesperson could retire with a $1 million nest egg. Secretary Wright sadly goes on to say that by 1980, most of these programs were ended due to hostile takeovers and the activities of people like Michael Milken or Carl Icahn. And then he ends with this quote: "It's impossible to predict what kind of America will emerge from the crisis," and of course he's speaking of the pandemic, "but the 4-decade trend toward higher profits and lower wages is unsustainable economically and politically. Sharing the profits with all workers is a logical and necessary first step to making capitalism work for the many, not the few. ICA believes that the best way to share profits with workers and create a more equitable economy is through employee ownership. When we go out to the world to share this idea, what we say to employees is, imagine you and your coworkers own a large part or all of the company that you work for. Your company may grow larger, faster, earn more profits than it did before. Share those profits with you. You'll likely receive better wages and get benefits. You'll be less likely to get laid off during downturns. You'll actively participate in decisions about your job, and you'll likely build a better retirement nest egg. To owners, we say, imagine if you sell the company to a broad base of its employees. You will receive fair market value for your business. You can finance the sale not with employee money, but with pre-tax dollars if it's an ESOP. And if it's a worker cooperative, you can access CDFI funds that combine with partial owner financing that allow you to set special terms. You can protect the jobs of the people whose work helped you build a company. You can preserve your legacy. And if you're not ready to retire, you can decide the role you want to play. You may also be eligible to defer capital gains taxes. To the community, its residents, political leaders, economic development officials, and others, we say you build stronger communities. Companies rooted in a city or a district largely owned by the employees will be less likely to close down or move away, and their employees less likely to be laid off during a recession. Wealth created will be shared more widely among the population, leading to a more broadly based prosperity. The local economy will be more vibrant and deliver higher productivity, and that will result in better prices, services, and goods for customers. And employee ownership enjoys bipartisan support politically. So that is my broad overview to introduce you all to why we think employee ownership is so special. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague who will give you more specifics. Insiyah?
Thanks, Shelley. Yeah, so Shelley gave you a little bit of a background on what the value propositions are for employee ownership from these different perspectives, the perspective of the owners, the workers, the community. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the data that we see when companies actually convert to employee ownership. So yeah, so some of the data points that we see are, first, in terms of earnings. We see that staff at employee-owned companies tend to earn 5 to 12% more income from wages than comparable companies. And Shelley, if you go to the next slide, this is a picture of a brand that you may know about, Harpoon Brewery, and an image of the moment when the owner, Dan Canary, announced that this company was converting to employee ownership, a specific form called an ESOP, which I will talk more about in this presentation. And this is to kind of demonstrate the energy behind this conversion process and the ownership that employees feel, both in terms of a sense of culture as well as the kind of practical money reasons, right? So this is a good, feel-good quote that we love to use. Dan said, "Stand up, turn to the person next to you and shake their hand because you guys are now the owners." That is a very real, tangible incentive for workers to be more involved in their workplace and to move it forward and to help it grow. Shelley, could you move on? Great. So the next data point we talk about is turnover. We also see that employee-owned companies tend to retain their workforce longer. This is especially salient in high turnover industries, one of which is the home care industry. And this is just like a very stark comparison of what we've seen with home care businesses overall in terms of turnover and what we see in home care co-ops. The turnover rate is half that of the industry average. Oh, someone here owns a home care agency. Awesome. So yeah, and this is an image of the Cooperative Home Care Associates. This is a prominent worker-owned company. It's a worker cooperative. And this is a great quote from their CEO talking about recognizing the challenges that workers are facing when they go out to do this very challenging work and addressing those things very proactively. So she said, we want to be able to really develop interpersonal skills so that workers can manage clients with complex family situations. When they go out in the field, it can be a very isolating job. And so recognizing that in this business, the very important stakeholders are the workers themselves, and what do they need to be at their jobs in a way that feels happy and sustainable for them. Shelley, next slide, please. And this is, our final data point we're going to share tonight. This is about security. So Shelley mentioned this a little bit. We see that ESOP participants have 2.5 times greater retirement savings than the average worker. And if you go to the next slide, this is an image from Web Industries, which is a precision manufacturing company, and just the owner talking about this feeling of pride about sharing the profits with workers and allowing everybody to kind of benefit from the work that they're putting in. So you've heard me mention a couple of different kinds of structures. Employee ownership is the umbrella term, and then there are structures within it. So these are two of the more common forms of employee ownership. One is an employee stock ownership plan, ESOPs. The other one is a worker cooperative. And if you go to the next slide, I'll talk first about ESOPs. So ESOPs are basically they're a deferred retirement plan, and workers are able to get able to participate in profit sharing through a trust. So this is a way for workers to be able to make more money on top of wages, and these are some of the prominent companies. You might recognize the King Arthur Flour brand, the Heartland Brewery, Lewis Tree Service. These are some prominent businesses that have ESOPs. ESOPs also, interestingly, have benefits for the company itself. So if your company is 100% ESOP, it doesn't have to pay federal taxes. It can, in most cases, not pay state income taxes. And so it's a way for the company to have these, for larger companies to have these big tax savings. ESOPs are expensive to administer. They have a setup cost and they have an annual maintenance cost. So for us, the work that we do with businesses, large businesses often, is weighing like that, the amount that you would pay to administer the ESOP against the tax savings and making sure that that balance feels right. Worker cooperatives are the second type of structure that we often deal with. These are businesses that are directly owned and controlled by their employees rather than by a single owner, several partners, or outside shareholders. This means that workers are able to, again, participate in profit sharing, so that's the ownership piece. And then workers are also able to be part of the governance of the business by running for the board of directors or electing the board of directors. Worker cooperatives need to, by law, have to have a majority of their board be worker owners. So they're able to play a very active role in the policy and kind of strategic direction of the business. One very common misconception that people have that we often encounter in our work with businesses, you know, folks say like, how can my business make any decisions if everybody is involved? Like, doesn't that cause chaos if everyone's, you know, weighing in on everything? And that's not really the case. Actually, worker cooperatives, sometimes if you look from the outside, they may not look very different than traditional companies. They have often management structures that are, the managers are controlling day-to-day operations, you know, kind of doing the managerial jobs, but workers are involved on this like board level decision-making. And they're also, you know, they're part of this membership group of worker owners that weigh in when really significant decisions are on the table. So for instance, if a company is deciding to move locations, that's a significant decision that would affect all workers. So that's when you get a direct vote, everyone. Or if the company is deciding to shut down, that's a significant decision. So there are these levels of governance that we kind of help people plan and design when we talk about the structure. So Shelley talked a little bit about our programs generally. We're national nonprofits, so we're able to do this kind of work with businesses anywhere. We're happy to work with businesses who are just kind of like learning about these structures, are interested, want to explore more. This slide specifically talks about our programs in New York City and Massachusetts. I know this is the Connecticut chapter, but I think this was shared a little bit beyond that geography. So if there's any folks from New York City or Massachusetts, know that we have some grant funding to be able to provide some free services and technical assistance to business owners around employee ownership. And in terms of Massachusetts, it's funded by the state. In New York City, it's funded by the Small Business Services through this worker cooperative business development initiative that's all about wealth building and creating ownership among workers. So what this looks like practically is that we help business owners consider whether employee ownership could work for them as a retirement or a transition plan, and see if their goals are compatible, understand. We work with them to understand their finances. We look at their profit and loss statements, balance sheets, and paint a picture of what the company is worth and determine whether a transaction to employee ownership could be financially feasible, as Shelley talked about earlier. So can the company continue on being able to pay for its operations, and also is it able to support any kind of debt financing or seller financing that might be involved? And then again, we try to understand what is the staffing structure. If like there's one owner operator and they're leaving and they hold all these different functions and decisions, we need to figure out how do you fill that role. So it's, either hiring someone else to take the reins or creating a distributed leadership structure with the existing employees. So really think about what's needed in terms of future staffing. And then we help folks kind of determine and implement their next steps towards a transition plan if it seems like it's feasible in the realm of possibility. This also, I want to end with this because I think it's, or I think there's a couple more slides, but I think it's important to mention our COVID response program. Shelley, if you go to the next slide. We found that in this time of uncertainty, a lot more businesses were at risk of closure. And we wanted to figure out how can we use the tool of employee ownership to try to keep doors open. Often we find that business owners don't even know that this is an option for them. And that is the biggest challenge, right? Like people are thinking about, well, I'm trying to leave my business. I'm gonna figure out how to liquidate my assets, or do I find a strategic buyer? This isn't even an option on the table. And so we help them consider that in a quick way so that you can be responsive to this moment. And I wanted to give you a list of the types of businesses that we've been working with through this program. So a lot of them are in construction, manufacturing, food processing, IT, education. I won't read all of them. But you can see that employee ownership can work in a lot of different types of industries. And then in terms of owner profiles, it's really interesting what we're seeing. So we've talked a lot about this retiring owner profile. There's folks who were already thinking about this and now with COVID are considering accelerated timelines to exit. So what happens if I think it's 50% or close to that number of companies that are owned by people that are very close to retirement? What happens when all those businesses close, right? What happens to the workers? What happens to that asset in the community? And so we're finding that folks are considering moving on an accelerated timeline. We're finding that burnout is taking a real toll. People are emotionally exhausted who are running businesses and are looking to share the responsibility and the risk of ownership with a bigger team. So that's been a really interesting process for us to work with those types of businesses for employee ownership. And then, in some high turnover industries, we're seeing that people want to create more incentives like profit sharing to bring people back to work, to create a stable workforce, etc. So you want to, next slide, Shelley. So I'm going to kind of stop there. We've been talking a lot with you all about these big ideas, but I wanted to end on this slide because I think there's some really good mission alignment between what you all do and what we do. I think your focus on people over profits, this idea of there are multiple stakeholders whose interests need to be negotiated. I think creating businesses where there's good work culture and people have buy-in to where they work, all of these things are things that we think about in our work. And so, just really happy to be here to share with you all, hear what you have to, share with us. And yeah, I'll pause there.
Well, thank you, ladies, for a really good reveal there. And it's interesting now with a lot of companies that are closing, well, what alternatives are there? I mean, surely closure is the worst possible outcome. And, it would be great if all interested parties, including employees, could come together for the benefit of saving the business in its newer form. So it's really good to see the ESOP and the co-op as two examples of that. A couple of questions in the chat around money and how much is required to make some of these transitions, because we know now there's so much stress in operating a business, and now of course all the customers have gone away. So you're talking about a very stressed preconditions, if you like. So, you know, is there any kind of thresholds in terms of the kind of equity that's involved from a employee's point of view? How much money do they have to put in, or is it something that is staggered over time, so there isn't no cash outlay? Give us a feel for that.
Shelley, do you want me to take
that?
that?
Yeah, Insiyah, you can take that.
Okay. Yeah, so the way that the transactions usually work is that the business entity takes on a loan to buy out the exiting business owner. This can happen in two ways, right? So the business borrows a chunk of money from a bank, from a community-based financial institution, that might be a lower rate or better terms, and then we'll pay that sum to the owner. The owner is kind of out of the company, and then the business pays that back to the bank over a course of time through the cash flows of the business. The other way it could work is if the seller wants to act as the bank, which is called seller financing. It's very common in many types of business transfer structures, not just employee ownership. In that case, the seller, there will be a seller's note, and the business, again, through its cash flows, will pay back the owner and like buy them out over a course of time. So it's really something for us to figure out, like, what is the burden? What is the debt burden that the business can afford? What is the timeline that it needs to be able to pay that back without creating an impossible situation for the business where it can't pay its operating expenses. And we also want to make sure that there's some amount left over, right, every year, that profit that can be shared with workers so that they feel the effects of employee ownership on a kind of shorter timeline. So that is like that's like the biggest kind of chunk in terms of the financial model. Employees also put in skin in the game. So usually employees will put in some amount that's meaningful, that's determined in the bylaws. And that will be their membership share, and that entitles them to being part of decision making and being part of profit sharing. So this really depends on the industry, what that price is. So we've worked with manufacturing companies where there was a company we worked with in Western Massachusetts. The workers were making, you know, pretty good salaries. The buy-in price was $10,000, and workers did not flinch. It was fine. They got paid, you know, paid that back very quickly. We've also worked with other kind of smaller businesses in like the childcare industry, for instance, where workers may not have that much money. And so what is that meaningful amount? It can be as low as $500. It can be as low as $1,500. It can be paid to the business over a course of time through payroll deductions. So there's lots of ways to be kind of flexible about that. And really that's about making sure that workers have invested something of themselves in this business. So is that a good overview of how this works?
Yeah. So how do you keep the employees engaged? And, you know, a lot of people, especially lower income, they're looking day to day. How do you keep them invested in the company and not just, oh, you gave me some stock, how can I sell it? How can I get the cash today? I've got some bills to pay.
Yeah, I think it's hard work. That is the hard work, right? That we do when we design the transaction. We come up with the governance structure. We do it with a steering committee that consists of workers who are going to be the future worker owners. And we're going to do it with, sometimes part of that group is the exiting owner. And we do it so that it's not just, it's not that every single person that works at the business will become an owner. There's often thresholds that you place around who can be a worker owner. So you might require that folks are at the business for 2 years or more, or that they put in this type of buying fee. They take these classes on like understanding the finances of the business or some element of running it. Also, I think worth saying is that the membership or your share does not increase in price over time. So if you put in $1,500, you can leave the company, will get back that amount. It's not gonna like grow where there's like, now the company is doing really well, you cash out, everyone leaves. And that is a kind of designed intentionally to be able to create it or not create an incentive for people to leave. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Can I just,
Yeah.
I just want to pipe in a little bit there because I'm not sure it was clear, but you can only sell your membership share back to the cooperative. So it's not like they can just like go out into the open market and share it and sell it on the open market. And actually, although the membership share doesn't grow, they do have these things called capital accounts, which is where the growth of the value of the business and their share in the growth in that value is captured. But again, the capital account is not something they can go out into the open market and sell. That's something that that the company itself, the cooperative, will buy back when they leave.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's not much of an incentive to leave your job to go. Yeah.
So it's not like stock options at a tech company in the Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So you have an incentive to stay because you want to let your capital account grow. So, and part of that ownership culture training, especially in that first year, the 12 months, it's very important in developing that ownership mentality as well.
So how does the ownership structure affect the management and decision-making structure? Are those two silos independent? Because I'm just trying to figure out the management organization. If everyone is equal equity shareholders, there may be some difficulty in that.
I think that's what Insiyah was driving at when she said people kind of have this idea of, like kind of anarchy, everybody's running the place. But typically, particularly in the ones that ICA designs, typically there is a more or less traditional management structure. And separately, there's the board and like major policy decisions. And it's in the major policy decisions that the membership will usually come in and take a vote on those things. But for the day-to-day operations, like if there's a general manager or what if the management team is, that team will run those day-to-day operations and everybody else will have their jobs. Now, it is possible to choose to have a flat management system or a flat decision-making system. But you do find that works with a smaller company. But once you start getting any size, which is like over 8, that starts becoming more difficult. You want to add anything to that, Insiyah?
No, only that often the general manager, if they're part of the ownership, can be also part of the board meeting, right? But it's not that they are like holding all of this power in the board space. They are, often we talk about limiting the influence of management on the board level in a way that, it's not that, so that other people have a chance to weigh in on the kind of policy decisions. But yeah, management has this reign over day-to-day operations and like the things that they need to do to be able to run. You know, you need to make decisions in real time, and you can't wait for the next board meeting to do that.
The few ESOPs that I know of have all been manufacturing, and I'm just wondering if manufacturing is a vertical of particular interest in the ESOP because of the apparent, you know, repetitive tasks and things like that. Is there any strong vertical that this structure is particularly successful in?
I don't really think so. I mean, one thing with an ESOP to take advantage of the capital gains savings, you do have to be a C corporation, perhaps more manufacturing firms or C corporations. But other than that, I don't think so. You know, I just think they're the ones who started doing it.
My guess
Yeah, and
is,
it's, sorry,
I was just going to say too, you know, I was thinking about, so a couple of things that I respond to right away. The whole, you know, from an equity point of view, it makes more sense. From just a human fairness point of view, you know, it makes a lot of sense. And then, you know, one of the really cool things about this is people are going to get engaged all of a sudden in you know, more business related, you know, thought process and thinking and, you know, finances and things like that. So there's going to be, you know, not everybody, but some people will start to get into that more because it'll be more important for them to understand, you know, what's happening. And I'm imagining that in a lot of these companies that do this, that there's either quarterly or some other periodic meetings where everybody kind of gets together and, you know, the current finances and situation and everything is explained and shared. And so people have got much higher level of understanding of what's going on in the business, what's happening. And I'm guessing that information is shared much more freely. You know, like in a normal company, people may just be hesitant to like, oh, somebody wants to know this, you know, should I tell them or not? In an employee owned company, it's probably going to be like, well, if I can't think of a reason not to, why not? You know, as opposed to like in a lot of other businesses, it's like, if I can't think of a reason to tell them this information, I'm not telling them, you know? So it sort of flips the dynamic around, and that higher level of information sharing and higher, you know, can't think of what I'm trying to say, but you know, that higher level of trust that just kind of comes in with that, I think is a really important thing.
Yeah, an example of a company, we work with this business called PV Squared.